for Q&A. Just to give you an idea about what the slides are going to cover. Firstly, like, who am I? What am I doing here? What my role in this is. A little bit about Supporters Direct, my organisation, and why we're relevant to this. Community ownership in football, or supporter ownership in football. That's something that I'm lucky to know a fair amount about, and I suppose that's really the main thing. The main reason I'm here is to share as much knowledge as I can to help you guys make an informed decision about whether it's the right thing for your football club. The referendum process, I'm assuming that you're all pretty clear on how it will work, but just to recap on how that looks. What the potential outcomes will be in terms of if yes and if no, and then loads of space for questions at the end. Just on the first point, so my role, I think it's important to say that this meeting is all about the referendum, really. You know, is community ownership the right thing for Kingstonian, your football club? We've got some comments already. I mean, there will be plenty of time to hear the no's, and I want to hear the no's and want to hear the why nots. In the end, it's not my club. As I say, we just want to inform. You know, we can be here as long as people want to stay here and ask questions and understand about whether it's right or wrong. But we have to try and keep the subject really about community ownership. That's what the public meeting's for. So, as well as keeping a degree of order, really my role is just to give you my experience of transitioning football clubs into community ownership, what the good points are, what the bad points are, where it's worked well, where it hasn't worked well, what other clubs are in community ownership, what do they look like, how relevant they are to you. I've been at SD for about 8 years, so I don't pretend to know everything, but I've worked with a lot of the clubs that have gone into community ownership or out of community ownership. And the other part of my role is to just oversee the referendum process. So my name is on the packs that you will have got, and I'm happy to answer questions individually outside of this meeting. If you don't want to ask them in this meeting, that's absolutely fine. And in the end, the ballot papers are coming through to me, and I'll announce the result. So that's why I'm here. So just a quick bit about Supporters Direct. This guy here is a bit of a legend, really. His name's Brian Lomax. Some people might have heard of him, others might not. He's quite a humble guy, really. He's a Northampton Town supporter. When Northampton Town got into financial trouble in the early 90s, he, I suppose, led a community revolution, I suppose. He rallied round, got the community to raise money, like many communities did when football clubs got into trouble. But rather than just give the money over, he said, well, actually, you know, we'd quite like to be involved in the club going forward. You know, it's all very well to present the money to the club, but actually we don't want this to happen again, and, you know, we think that actually having supporters involved is a good thing. So he became the first supporter elected director at a football club at Northampton Town in the 90s, and various people in football and government thought it was a good idea. They spoke to Brian and essentially set up Supporters Direct off the back of his work. So just a very quick bit about us. So it's a busy slide. I'm not going to go into all the detail, but we've been around for about 15 years. Our work really is either setting up supporters trusts who want to have more say in their club, don't necessarily own the club, or setting up supporter-owned or community-owned clubs. And there's now over 50 of those, and I'll talk a bit more about those in a minute. Amongst those trusts and clubs, they've raised over 50 million across the 15 years. And our role, I suppose, is to be in the middle of the network, to train and connect the different groups, lobby on their behalf, and yeah, really represent them as members. So we're a members organisation. Our owners, as it were, are the trusts and the clubs that are members of us. So they elect the board, and the board employ me and a few others to carry out the work. So again, you won't be able to see that slide. Maybe I'll just skip on. I'll tell you about the community-owned clubs in a minute. So I suppose I wanted to talk about the club structure and why that is more important than, it sounds a bit dull, doesn't it? You know, some people are interested in structures and legal bodies and policies and procedures. So forgetting all that, really, for us, it's really about thinking about your club and what are the sort of things that are coming up in your club, and whether this change of ownership will help or hinder those issues. So sort of things to consider are, does your existing structure encourage people to be part of the club? Do you want lots of people to own the club? If you want to widen the ownership as broadly as possible, how do you make decisions with so many opinions? Do you have aspirations to own and develop facilities for the club? How will they be funded? Can your club structure help you reduce costs and increase your income? Does changing your legal entity help, hinder, and if so, what are the options? For us, the choice of legal structure can make a difference in some of those areas, but I think they're fairly standard questions that most people, particularly non-league football, would probably think are important. So I'm going to talk you through how the legal structure could possibly help, and then obviously talk about, you know, what are some of the perhaps negatives around it as well. So firstly, like, what do we mean by a community-owned club? This was on the paperwork that was sent out. This is the definition that we work to. So a minimum of 50% plus one of the club is controlled collectively by an entity which has an open and inclusive membership. It could be 100%. The important thing is that the majority of the club is controlled by you know, normal members, supporters who can pay a small amount, open. You know, it's not exclusive, to join and have a say. Membership works on a one member, one vote principle. Doesn't mean every single decision will be made by the whole membership, and that's something we can get into a bit later, but the membership is one member, one vote. So the board are elected by the membership, and anyone can put themselves forward to stand for the board. Any profits sometimes gets a snigger, particularly in non-league football. Are there any profits in non-league football? But if there are, they're reinvested back into the club as opposed to being distributed to shareholders. Whether that, as I say, happens or not, the principle that that's in place should mean something to other people who look on at the club. And the club is committed to running as a sustainable business. Otherwise, you know, what's the point? It's about the long-term future of the club. So that's the basic definition. So, in practice, what does that translate? I've covered some of these points. So, one member, one vote. Open membership to people who support the objects of the club. There's an annual membership renewal. So, say people have to join each year. If they don't join, then they don't get a vote, which goes against the majority of clubs, particularly in non-league. I don't know if anyone's ever had the pleasure of searching Companies House to see what other structures exist, but you tend to get a mixture of private companies, limited by shares, which is what you are at the moment. Unincorporated organisations that don't have a legal structure. Few companies limited by guarantee and a few community benefit societies, but the vast majority of private companies limited by shares, which don't have a renewing membership. So you often get a long list of shareholders that at one point put some money into the club and for whatever reason over the years might not even know they own those shares anymore. People might have died. Life moves on, doesn't it? So the community-owned club concept needs you to renew annually. So there's an active membership so that decisions can be made by people that are still interested in going to games and, care about the club. Able to raise money in a cost-effective way. So, clubs pretty much up to championship level, really, just small businesses, particularly obviously non-league. So if you're going to go out and raise money through shares, which is one of the benefits of the community-owned model we use, then you don't want to be paying large amounts of money for a prospectus, because like a company would in a share offer. So with the community benefit society model, which we use, because it exists for the benefit of the many, not the few, there's less restrictions on going out to get investment, which is different if you're a company. So if you're a limited company, you have to have a prospectus. It's a little bit more complex than that, but you could be looking at paying 100,000 just to go out with a prospectus to raise money. So I'm happy to talk more about that in the Q&A, because some people were interested in it and some don't want to know. but it's a model that's been effective for quite a lot of our community-owned clubs for raising finance towards stadiums and takeovers. So the governing board is predominantly elected by the membership. There's elections every year, either half the board or a third of the board, so there's continuity and opportunity for people to stand. But, there's delegated authority still given to staff, volunteers to operate on a day-to-day basis. If you've got 300 members, you can't, as we all know, just from our own working lives, you can't operate with 300 people telling you what to do. So you have the members, really, if you imagine like almost a pyramid structure, the members ultimately own the club. They elect the board, who operate the club on their behalf in line with the constitution, so there's a degree of kind of protection about what the club does. But then you'd give delegated authority to different groups or individuals to do a certain job. And if they're not doing, and then they'd report back, so there's a bit of accountability as well. Club that only spends what it earns, with any profits reinvested. And the last one's probably sounds a bit better than it is, to be honest, so I won't oversell it. Assets of the club protected. There's nothing to stop this club, say nothing to stop it. If the club is mismanaged, it will get into trouble still. But if there's lots of people that own it, in theory, the chances of it getting to that point are a lot less, because there are lots of people that are more interested and engaged in how the club is run. What I mean by the assets of the club protected, within the rules that we use, there's something called a dissolution clause, which basically means that if there are any assets, they can't be distributed to individuals. They have to go to a charity or a similar organisation. So it stops the potential of someone trying to extract any profits and to a degree of the assets in the club. Doesn't completely stop mismanagement. And ultimately, I suppose for many, particularly non-league clubs, it's a legal structure that reflects what you are and helps build profile. I say non-league, I think any supporter of their club feels like they morally own the club, but whether they legally do or not is often a different question, and that causes a lot of conflict. So slightly nerdier slide. Some people say I'd be more interested in this and others, so I'll be quick. As I said, these are the typical legal structures you get in football. So you get unincorporated clubs, so there's no legal entity there, which can suit some clubs, particularly the smaller clubs, because there's a bit of extra work that goes on for anyone who owns a company or knows about companies. But one of the main issues there is you don't get the limited liability status. So that means that the risks will be with individuals rather than as a collective. So with any of the incorporated bodies, it means that your risk is limited to whatever your shareholding is, and in the case of the model we use, it's £1. Yeah. So,
who pays the tax?
well, so it still operates under a normal basis in terms of law, and so if people running the club are making decisions where they're signing things and not looking at what they're signing and entering into contracts that they can't meet, then they'll still be treated in the same way as if they were running a company or a charity but
the people running this level of being responsible.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as they realise that.
Exactly. But in terms of it's typical really when businesses get to a certain size, and I'd certainly say that every club in your league you would expect to be incorporated. Funnily enough, a few years, probably only about 5 years ago, have the rules changed slightly, because Dagenham got all the way up to promotion out of conference with being an unincorporated club, and they were actually forced to incorporate to get into the league. But they are very rare in that sense. So pretty much every club in your league would be incorporated. So then the next question is, well, what would you're already incorporated, so the debate isn't about that, but it could be a private company limited by shares, as you are now. But if you want to be a community-owned club, then you're either a company limited by guarantee, which is popular with a lot of charities, a community interest company, or what we believe is the best model, which is the Community Benefit Society. And I'm happy to talk about why, if it doesn't come out of some of the other slides. But the Community Benefit Society is the model that all the other support-run clubs use. So it's kind of tried and tested. So this is the bit where I quantify it as saying it can. There's no guarantee. It's ultimately up to the community and the supporters. But the model of community ownership can lead to more supporters, can lead to more volunteers, can lead to more sponsors, can lead to more trust in terms of how the club is operating, which can in turn lead to more money. We talked about protection and more sustained success. So we do have a little bit more than just nice words to back some of this stuff up. So for example, we did do a study of largely non-league clubs, football clubs, which got them to track the number of volunteer hours that are put in each year and monify them. So on average, a community-owned club, we worked out, has about £125,000 worth of volunteer support going into it each year. On the money, we looked at investment that the clubs have managed to get, which they otherwise wouldn't have been able to get if they were privately owned, which was similar amount. I think it was about 150k a year. Now, again, I don't want you to get too excited by thinking, whack that figure straight away into your budget, because it all depends on, obviously, why you need that money, what you're raising it for. There aren't grant funders out there who are just going to give you money to put into your playing budget. But the clubs have done well in various ways of generating that money. So community shares is one of them, for example. So Lewis, who you'll know, who haven't had the best year on the pitch, off the pitch are actually doing pretty darn good. So the year they got relegated, I don't know if anyone's seen their facilities, but the year they got relegated, they actually raised 200,000 through a share offer, which allowed them to access about 800,000 worth of grants, which allowed them to build a 3G pitch next to their main pitch. So, despite getting relegated and being pretty dismal on the pitch, they've ended up off the pitch with a pretty darn good facility, which was certainly helped by the fact they were a community-owned club, because they had over 200 people put money into that scheme, and it allowed the other funders to see that there were lots of people committed to putting their own money in, which de-risks their own investment, if you see. But equally, ultimately, they only got that money because it was a good scheme. You know, it was going to get more kids playing football and various other things. And I think they've still got over 500 paying members at Lewes. So, Lewes, yeah.
They've still got their own pitch to do it with, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, so we can move on to that. Hang on. So I thought, in terms of a bit of benchmarking, I don't know if you can see all this. I have got 3 slides, but I know you'll probably like some stats, so I've got some stats. So I've just put the different clubs that are supporter owned, different levels they're at, and the average attendances. So I can work down basically, so from level 3 all the way down to 8, 9 and 10, which is beneath where you guys are. So I won't go through them all, but you've got various clubs. I don't know how many supporter-owned clubs you're aware of, but you know, there's clubs above you. I'll concentrate maybe on the clubs similar level. So step above, which is worth talking about as well, Telford United, because they've just voted to go back to private ownership. So they have been supporter-owned for 12 years, and they've worked their way back up the pyramid.
Could I just ask you how Bradford Park are getting on? We've only got a few supporters there, haven't they?
Yeah, they've only just become community-owned from the start of this season. So, and actually, that's a good. It brings me on nicely to a slightly different point, which is this column here. Is how we classify how the clubs become community-owned, which is quite. It's actually not just a nerdy. It is actually useful for you guys to think about, because we classify them as either new starts, so where clubs have just started at the bottom of the pyramid and made their way up, like an FC United really. A reformed club where the club's gone bust. They've started at the bottom of the pyramid and worked their way back up. So think about Chester City, someone like that, and a number of smaller clubs as well. Then, let's say acquisition, where the community have put a bid together to take over the club. The club stayed in the existing league. Quite often, again, it might be because they're in financial trouble. So, Bath City, they've just literally done it. They've just raised 300,000 in the last few weeks to take over Bath City. And then I think we need a new word for this, because it doesn't really, maybe it's transition, but developmental we've called it here, which is basically where the owners of the existing club have decided that this model is better suited to them and that they would rather widen the membership. So Tunbridge Angels would be one, which will resonate nicely because you beat them at the weekend, didn't you, I think? But, you know, Tunbridge Angels, the guys down there, kind of, I think there were 6 or 7 of them that own the shares, and they just thought, well, actually, I think all of them have stayed involved, but they just wanted to widen the membership and get people working together under the new community-owned club. So this is going down a little bit further in the league. So level 7, you've got Banbury United, Dorchester Town, Enfield Town, not FC United, that's an error by me, they're now level 6. Grays, it's just about to be confirmed, so I hope, so please keep that to yourself. They're not having the best of times at the moment, but they're hoping to transform their fortunes. Hendon, Hyde United, Lewes, again, I need to update that, sorry, they've been relegated. Merthyr Town, Tunbridge Angels. And down here, you know, you see there's a real mixture of attendance, average attendances. Some of them are bigger than yours, some of them are smaller. And it goes on, I promise, it goes deeper. So you've got Congleton Towns and Bamber Bridges, and there is another slide, but I won't go into too much detail. I suppose.
So which of these are 5149?
So the vast majority are 100%. The ones further up the list, particularly where there's been an acquisition, often there's maybe a kind of 60-40 or a bit of an odd situation, but the vast majority are 100%. It's more, I'd say it's not more that they've decided to be 51-49, it's more like they've tried to take over the situation that they've had, if you see what I mean. So I can't think of any of them that have seen it as a strategy to sell shares to get to 51, i.e. dilute their shareholding. It's more like they were only able to buy 58.5%, if you see what I mean.
Also, how many of them have got their own assets? E.g. a pitch to play on, a bar to take takings. How many of them? What's the percentage on that?
All of them.
Apart from Grays.
No,
Grays play at Aveley, but
I'd actually say
and they're bottom of our league.
it's actually not a pretty picture, because a lot.
So all them own their pitches. Rushden is a reformed club with 450 supporters.
Rushden,
which is ex-football league. So they've got their right. They've already got the 450 supporters. Yeah. Whatever you said on there. Yeah. So how many of them own their own pitch?
No, I'm more than honestly happy to.
Yeah.
It's a good question. So as you work down, they've all got Darlington haven't. At the bottom.
Yeah, they're a reformed club, ex-football league with.
Okay. Now I take your point. So, so Enfield have now, but it's taken them 10 years basically to get to the point.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
So, Grays no, Hendon no.
Hendon have they? They play at Kingsbury.
Well,
they share elsewhere. They play at Kingsbury. We went there 2 weeks ago.
But yeah, it's
no, don't own it, but they've got yeah. So when they are in the league, though.
But no, I mean it is a good question, because a lot of these are actually tied up in losing their grounds. You know, that's often where a lot of the problems stem from. So Merthyr Town, for example, are now back at their ground, but they've only just, well, in the last couple of years got back there. It's taken a few years. I mean, Scarborough,
ex-football league, yeah.
Okay, ex-football league, but they've played in Bridlington for the best part of 10 years. AFC Rushden Diamond, okay, ex-football league, but they don't have their own ground, and they play, I think, about half an hour outside. These clubs, Fisher FC, have only moved back this year, so for 6-7 years have been playing Dulwich. Northwich don't have their own ground. None of the top two have their own ground.
Okay.
So it's a mixture, you know. It is a mixture. And I want to talk about the challenges, because you know there's no point hiding them. So here's just a few that I thought, and then, you know, people will have other questions as well. You know, there's a good question I think there about how many of those are relevant to you. That's, I think, what you're getting at, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at.
Ex-football league. So only as big as the community willing to support it is a fair question. You know, there's no point me having a great meeting and convincing all of you lot that it's the right thing to do, and then, you know, actually you think, well, in the end, I'm not really up for it. You know, it's an opportunity. It could be brilliant. You know, it might be that actually people would rather stick into the old system of being a privately owned club where, you know, ultimately you don't have any say unless the owners want you to have some say. But at the same time, it's an opportunity that could completely change the whole dynamic, and people could all buy into it, and all really get behind it and create a spark in the other direction. There's challenges that we always get around, I mentioned it earlier, understanding or expectation of decision making in a cooperative structure. You know, it's not just football clubs, any sort of cooperative or membership organisation has got this. You know, we've seen it recently at FC United, to be honest. Their board pretty much got overthrown by certain sections of the club, which wasn't particularly pretty to watch. I think a lot of it stemmed from actually understanding that if you, for example, go to your job, you know, you'll report into someone and they'll tell you how well you're doing on your job, but you can't do that with 300 or 500, 1,000 different people. So, you know, it's getting the right place, I suppose, in terms of a structure where people have got enough delegated authority to do certain things that are important for the club, but then there's accountability as it moves up the chain. Cash flow, or just money in general, so that, you know, the opportunity to fall back on someone who's got money, who can inject some money at short notice if the club, you know, has 2 months worth of home matches called off or whatever it might be. Again, it can be managed by having a decent level of working capital, but it's a different proposition if you're privately owned, isn't it?
You mean we've got to have Greg Dye amongst us?
Well, I don't know about Greg Dye, his record in football, but having a few wealthy people might be useful, because you know, it's things, you know, as we know, particularly at this level, your income is a lot determined by supporters, particularly if you haven't got your own ground. So if games are called off and if games aren't going well, you want to have a bank of money you can draw on. Changing dynamic for supporters as well. As I said, some supporter bases thrive on it, they really want it, they love it. Again, it has to really be something that captures the imagination. People can see why it's going to work, why it could be the right thing for Kingston, and, you know, why there's potential benefits. You know, I'd say to a degree it's what's going on at Lewes. You know, despite getting relegated, they can probably see that the bigger picture is their club's in a really good place, and they'll bounce back and they'll be a lot stronger for it. Equally, people could look at Lewes and say, well, they've got relegated, so it's failed. I mean, I would say at this level, you're just as likely to be successful to get promoted as you are relegated with community ownership. I think as you move up the leagues, it gets more difficult. But as I say, I don't need to be convinced. It's your supporters that need to be convinced. If people, I think someone said to me, like, a good story was, they're supporter owned. It just becomes supporter owned, and, you know, naturally when you're watching your team not playing well, striker misses another chance, someone shouts like, buy another striker, board or whatever, and it's kind of like you've got to turn around and look at your own supporter base really and say, we've got to find the money for that striker. You know, and that's essentially it. You're in control of your own destiny. So, I mean, there are a few challenges that I've seen. There will be others too, but I've also given a lot of positives too. And on the, I think it's worth talking in terms of summary about the ground. As I said, a lot of our clubs have lost their ground and then become supporter owned. I would say certainly that they, and you know, you can ask them yourselves if you want to, that by being community owned, it has helped them build the partnerships with people like the local authority, as well as the raising the money bit as well, which I've already talked about. But it's easier to build, I suppose, partnerships with people like the local authority, local MP, other public bodies, if you've got a structure that says we're community owned, if we make any money, it goes into the club, our assets are protected to a point. So if you're going to put any grant money into us or whatever, then there's a degree of protection. That's what the clubs we've found work with. Doesn't mean it's not been difficult. As I said, Enfield Town, it took them the best part of 10 years to get get that agreement from the council, get a lease. Fisher, it's taken the best part of 5 years, but the model has helped them in a sense, because I think they're able to just win over a little bit more support in terms of commitment. So I'm almost done, then we can have Q&A, I promise. I just very quickly, in case anyone's not clear, so the process has 252 people registered to vote. The forms are already coming in, but basically you have to get them into Supporters Direct by the 25th of November, and then on the 29th of November we'll announce the result. And it'll be a simple majority either way. Almost there. 2 more slides, because I think this might answer some of the questions. So if it's a yes, this is sort of typically how it might look. So the result is announced. If it's a yes, the existing directors would invite some of the working party onto the board as a sort of interim basis. The club would then, so the company would convert to being a community benefit society, which is the model I talked about, which all of those 50 clubs have used. So we have a sort of standard set of rules basically that we just tweak for each club. We try and time it with the end of the season, the financial year end. The club as a CBS would start its life as debt-free, membership would be opened up at an affordable level to be determined. The membership fees of the clubs that we work with range from probably a £5 up to about 35 quid, and a lot of them in between. Then the interim board, so that working party, whatever you want to call it, interim board, will run the club up to the first election. Obviously you need to get members in anyway before you can then have an election. And then following on from that, depending on what you have in the rules, either all the board would stand if they wanted to, or they'd not stand. Any one of the members can stand for the board. And then there'd be a cycle where either half the places are available or a third of the places are available from then on. And that would be just the way the club worked moving forward. That's roughly if yes, and then obviously if no, then the club would continue to run under the same ownership structure as privately owned club. Right, so I'm about to say questions, although I think, John, you want to read out a statement, is that right?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming tonight. Firstly, an apology from Malcolm, who, due to foreign business commitments, is unable to be here this evening. As you will be aware, we have been committed for some time to exploring the opportunity of returning the ownership of the football club to supporters and providing you with the opportunity to vote on whether you would like this to happen. If you look at the history of the football club, then it was a members-owned club until 1996, when it became a limited company and issued shares. More recently, in order to empower supporters to be involved in running their own football clubs, the community-owned club model has evolved, with supporters becoming shareholders with limited liability. Having set up a working party to explore the possibility of Kingstonian FC becoming a community-owned club, we are now at the point where registered supporters are being offered the opportunity to vote on whether they would like the club to become community-owned or remain directors-owned. We have heard supporters asking why now. Well, this is a crossroad in the club's history. As you're aware, the directors have made the decision to move away from Kingsmeadow from next season, with a period of ground sharing ahead. At the same time, the club is working with developers to build a new ground to accommodate all of our various teams. This would be a community facility, and if achieved, the aim would be to safeguard the long-term future of the club with facilities that it would own and benefit from the new income streams associated with renting out pitches and conference rooms to the local community. The project is at the very early stages at the moment, but if it is achieved, then we believe that this is the best way forward to ensure the long-term stability and sustainability of the club. We recognise that this is a big step and that supporters may not want to be more closely involved with running the club at the present time. We also recognise that supporters may feel that they do not have the expertise or time to do so. If the vote is in favour of becoming a community-owned club, then we will remain involved to help and support the handover to the elected new board in order to take the club forward and to ensure that those elected receive training and assistance in taking over the running of the club. The directors have committed to writing off their loan balances and leaving the new community-owned club with a debt-free starting position. There is also the extremely generous donation provided by AFC Wimbledon, which includes the agreement to allow a small percentage to be used for ground rental costs and budget support for the next 3 seasons. We also hope that the change in ownership to a community model will help to attract new supporters and new sponsors to the club. If the vote is in favour of remaining as a directors-owned club, then we will carry on for the immediate future. We will also need to consider our own individual positions and long-term involvement within the club. To be clear, this is an open vote and the directors are recommending a change of ownership to the principle of a community-owned club because we feel that this is the best option for the future of the club. It is for you to decide whether this is what you want or whether you would prefer for the club to remain as directors-owned. Thank you.
Okay, you've listened to us for a long time, so yes, happy to answer questions really on the subject.
So I'm going to kind of compare this a little bit. If you want to say your name and then your question, and we'll go around, but I'll do it by a show of hands. And the first hand I saw was over here, but I don't know where it's gone now. Okay, over to Jeff with the first question. I think this period is supposed to be about an hour, but I don't think there's any particular time constraint on it.
Right, I'll try and be short and sweet with this. Whilst the board have been talking to supporters direct over this, I've been talking to other parties on the supporters' behalf who have knowledge of community-based clubs. And the individual I spoke to had it places great emphasis on 3 issues. First of all, that any club wishing to be successful doing this needs to have a young to middle-aged supporter base, a vibrant base, many of whom are at their peak earning power, so that core costs can always be covered internally if support from local authorities isn't forthcoming. The second issue he stresses is that the club needs a relative army of experienced professionals that can go out in the daytime and drum up the additional costs to supplement the core costs that hopefully come from their own supporters. We're not talking about 1 or 2 men here that might have a couple of hours spare after they've had their evening meal. We're talking about experienced professionals with business knowledge that can go in front of committees and convince them to part with a part of their money towards our football club. And the third issue, and the most important to me, is that the advice I've got is that the vibrant supporter base that we're supposed to have needs to have a passion to make sure that the club survives, not only in the first year, but year 2, year 3, year 4, out to year 10, out to year 20. And I don't know, you guys tell me, you all know me, you guys tell me, have we had much passion in this football club for the last 15 years, ever since we went to Wembley?
No.
Right, couple that with the question and answer document that came out. That to me was like a hopes and aspirations document. I was looking for the appendices in the back. I saw no financial business plan in there for the next, say, 3 to 5 years, against which we can measure ourselves to see if we've been successful or not. And I also saw no resource plan whatsoever, showing resources required and resources already locked in. A lot of talk in that document about what can happen, what might happen. We're about to take a very important step here, and I just hope the supporters realise that it's pretty obvious the way I'm going with this. I just hope supporters realise that this is a very important vote. But those that want change must be able to prove to us beyond doubt that change is for the better of this football club. And I think I better shut up now and sit down.
So in summary, is there the youth, the expertise and the passion? Does anyone want to take that on?
And the numbers.
From the group? Just trying to get something that can be answered.
Okay, I can't answer. I don't know your community as well, but I do. As I say, I've worked with the 50 odd clubs, and. What's that, sorry? Hang on, let me just go. I think.
Fuck all today.
All right, if we just have a little bit of order. I think I don't disagree with the comments in terms of it's going to come from your community. That's the point on the slide, which says it's only going to be successful as a community willing to support it, and that's ultimately, going to be down to you guys. Is this model going to get more people in? Is it going to get younger people in? Is it going to get other people from Kingston in that are going to want to connect with this football club? Because if you're saying that the supporter base hasn't been as active and passionate in the last 15 years, is the model you've got now going to change that, or is it just going to continue as you are, or is by changing community ownership, is that going to give people more interest and connection with it? Now, I think there's opportunities from the experience of the other clubs that by opening up the ownership structure that can happen, but it's not just by changing the legal structure is not necessarily going to happen. So I think it's a valid point, and I think in terms of the business model, all the clubs that we've worked with, as I said, are committed to running the club sustainably. How much income they get and how successful they are is going to be based on how successful they are as a club. So, most turnovers of clubs at step 7 are going to be within a similar band, really, because most of the income comes from similar areas. But in terms of the business plan, I guess you don't necessarily know until you know how many people are going to commit to this model.
So I asked John Penny. Yeah. You very kindly, John, summarised one, and you pointed out the generous amount being handed over by AFC Wimbledon. My understanding is that we're leaving at the end of this season. It doesn't look as if AFC Wimbledon will be leaving at the end of this season. Can you guarantee they will be giving us the money at the end of this season? Or are they expecting not to hand it over until they leave and take over their own ground?
I'm the person who can answer that question, but my answer will be...
The mic, please.
Yeah, mic.
Yeah.
And we need an answer.
I said that I'm not the person on this board that can answer that question because I'm not directly involved in the conversations with AFC London. I am of the understanding that that money will be paid at the end of the season.
I'm not trying to catch you. I'm just saying we need money to do all these various things at the end of the season. And frankly, providing AFC Wimbledon is going to hand over £1 million, whatever it is, at the end of this season, fine. Gives us a starting win. If they're going to wait until such time as they put a new ground, which will be 5 or 10 years ago when things are going to move, it's a hopeless situation. In other words, referring to our friend with the microphone, is this viable?
Is the club viable?
No, not the club viable. It's the suggestion that we become a community. Is that viable? We don't have an AFC Wimbledon money for it.
Yeah. Well, what I was trying to get at is, it is viable. That's why I suppose I put the slide with all the clubs that go deeper down the pyramid than you guys. It's going to be, where your place is in the football pyramid. That's the question. So there's clubs that are playing 2 steps below you that are getting less than half your gate.
I don't want to be funny. I've watched this club for 60 years, and I'm very sad about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And therefore, that is why I'm speaking out, apart from the fact that the support was very highly made me there.
Yeah.
I feel I need to speak on their behalf. I'm not trying to be bloody awkward. It's just that I can see that the whole thing is likely to fall. I'm personally in nearly 80, so I've had my good times with that. But younger people haven't yet. And I'm connected with another small club now, so I can walk off and go there. So I'm only talking on their behalf. Yeah. And what you put over, there's a wonderful case, and I'm sure you know exactly what you're saying. But when teams like Brentford take over, when I say collective domain, they have enough people who run there. When I look around amongst our friends here, there's very few of them that have none. And I honestly don't think that it is a viable situation. I hope I'm 100% I'm wrong. But at the moment, I don't even know when we're going to play what's happening. And that's why I'm sure I had to speak. Yeah. And those people will laugh, there he goes again. But nevertheless, I'm quite happy to walk away from the club after tonight. And that's it. I've had a good time here. And I'm sure a lot of people have.
Okay, we're going to need to. We're going to need to share out these questions, but we'll come back to you, I'm sure, later on. Anyone over this side?
Yeah, mate.
I'm going to Alistair first.
Hi everyone. So forgetting the pros and cons of actually being a supporter-owned club for the moment, I just don't think we could even get onto that, because for me this ballot paper is just a complete farce, and I don't even think we should be voting because it's been so badly constituted, personally. Reading the actual ballot paper, the community ownership model that meets the following definition: a minimum of 50% plus one of the voting rights of the club to be controlled collectively by a democratic entity which has an open and inclusive membership. So that is, if we vote for a community-owned club, that is what we are voting for. And then in the leaflet that we get told that when we vote for that, the new board decides what form that takes. So that could be one member, one vote, that could be 51-49, that could be anything in between in terms of how we're actually constituted. So we don't even know what we're voting for. We literally don't even know what we're voting for, and the ballot paper's already out there. Personally, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And what I would say is, if there isn't going to be a guarantee this evening that if we vote to go for a community-owned club, that there will be a second referendum with exactly the same electorate, with exactly the same 252 people, that then decide what form that takes, I don't see how this can stand. Because me personally, I would never vote for one member, one vote. I think one member, one vote of 100% would be the death of this club. We've only got 250 fans. How can 250 fans raise the money to run a club one member, one vote? If there were other models on the table that we could talk about, I might be interested in voting for it. But the basic point is that on the actual ballot paper itself, we do not know what we're voting for. And that's just that side of the ballot paper. Sorry to go on. We don't know what Remain means either, because we don't understand anything about the finances of the club. We don't know what the black hole is in terms of how much money the directors are putting in each season or not, so we don't know whether it's sustainable anyway. So basically, we don't know what we're voting for if we vote Remain. We don't know what we're voting for if we vote for a community-owned club. So this whole thing, in my opinion, is ridiculous anyway. I'm sorry to be so negative, but that's it.
I think the ballot paper is quite clear in terms of using the definition of community ownership. So I'm slightly losing where that's not clear.
So you said all those clubs, basically, that you went through are one member, one vote, like AFC.
They're all one member, one vote.
So basically, we would, to vote for a community-owned club, as far as you understand it, as a sort of returning officer, we would be voting for a one member, one vote club. Yeah. Well, in which case it's a no from me then. But I you know, there may be other people that think differently. But to me,
can I come in there, please? The way I think it is going to work, and what we tried to put into the document, was that the community-based club would be one member, one vote. Mm-hmm. But the community-based club would then own the football club. Mm-hmm. And then the football club could be any structure from 50 plus 1 to 100%. Yep. So you are voting for a community-based club that will be one member, one vote. This club will then buy the football club.
Okay, thank you. So that is what I figured from the leaflet.
So what's
who decides? The electorate don't decide.
As it says in the leaflet, if we go to be a community-based club, the board will then look at how we do this, and we'll possibly go back to the members.
So no offence, I know you're all supporters up there, but therefore what is the point of this vote? Because if we vote to become a community-owned club, the board still decide how to constitute
the board.
So what are we voting for? They don't understand what we're voting for.
Yeah, but the board is responsible for the debt.
I don't get it. Sorry, I just don't get it at all.
No, all of the clubs I've spoken to fit that definition. So essentially, you are voting for whether you want the control of the club to be with the members on a one-member, one-vote basis. And so you will then decide whether you want 99% or 50 plus 1 or 100%.
Yeah, no, we won't decide based on the leaflet.
Well,
the board will decide. That's my point. So if there was going to be a second referendum, so we say, right, we're going to be community owned, fantastic. Now, we're going to be community owned, how are we going to constitute the clubs? And we get another vote on it. Brilliant. That's great. That's not set anywhere.
I'm sorry, if the referendum says yes, the members will own this football club and they will decide how it's constructed.
That's not what it says in any other literature, so that's fantastic.
That's the vote on the ballot. I mean,
no, it's not what it says on the ballot.
Well, it's exactly.
With all due respect, that's not what it says on the ballot.
That definition is written on the ballot form.
Yeah, but that covers any number of options, doesn't it? So we're voting for any number, like Brexit. Brexit means a million different things. You're voting for any one number of options.
The point is, if the members on a one-member, one-vote basis control the club, then you will decide.
We would not have been constituted until the 31st of May. So how we decide with that, we would still be a directors' own club until the 31st of May, correct? Yes.
You will. Yeah.
Yes. Whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So in the intervening period between the vote being counted in whatever that is, sorry, I don't know what that is at the end of the year, and May, the directors still own the club. So effectively, they can do what they need to do.
Committed for it to be the community-owned club.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But so what say do the supporters have then between the 1st of December and the 31st of May?
So there is always an interim. In all of those clubs there's an interim period. So immediately there's some of the working party will be on the board to work alongside the board to steer you to basically at the end of the season having and our advice would be we'll share the constitution that all the other 50 clubs have got.
Yeah.
We'll share that with all the members, we'll decide on it. But the principle is, do you want to be a community-owned club or not? If yes, then we'll work with you, with the new working party, with other people here involved, to make that happen. So it's impossible to say on 27th of November the club will just shift to this.
Yes, I know. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry, I'm obviously not expressing myself well. There are many different models of community ownership. You yourself talk through some of them.
Yeah.
I know that supporters recommend a particular model of supporter ownership. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it would be for the club to decide, or the fans, sorry, to decide what we wanted to do. Yeah. But we've not been given there's not going to be another vote. So and presumably on the 31st of May, we become constituted as whatever we have decided to become constituted.
So you can ask for another vote.
So there's got to be another vote, hasn't there? How could there not be another vote?
Can't you ask for it if you own it?
Well, our advice would be, here's our constitution, this is what it's going to look like. Yeah. But the commitment is that you're going to have to end up with something that meets that criteria, which, so whether it's a company limited by guarantee, a KIC or a CBS, it gives control to you as the supporters.
Right.
So,
All right, fair enough.
Okay.
Going to go to Paul at the back.
Am I right in
just talk to the mic.
Yeah, talk to the mic, Paul.
I'm not talking through that. The way I see it is, this vote is basically, do you want to go in or out, let's say. That's the way I look at it. And then it'll run like, say, a social club. So you pay a yearly membership, and then you elect a committee, like you do in, say, a CIU club or something like that, and then the committee run the club. Yeah. But the actual members of that social club actually own the club. Yeah. Is that the way? Yeah. That's the way I read it. That's the way it works. That's the
Yeah, that's right, Paul.
So that's how it should work. So if yes, then the directors invite the working party onto the board. They're working towards getting a community-owned club in place for the end of the season, and then off you go, and then you've got that social club set up. So
that's it. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Just one question from here, and I'll come to the left side.
I was going to ask the question, why is it having a vote now rather than when the new ground is being built, whereas Jeff said there would be the passion because you could see where the future lies, which could be 2 or 3 years away, I just think that the timing is wrong now. I think when the new ground was actually being built, I think you would get the passion, you get the enthusiasm, and it will be not less of an unknown. So why now and why not in 2 or 3 years' time?
To Mark, if Mark got an answer. There's a mic to your left as well.
Come on, fight.
I think it's been done now. It can be done again in a couple of years' time. And somebody has said to me already, and it's like the film, isn't it? Build it and they will come. And I think you're quite right. And we can do that in a couple of years' time. No problem at all. We can have another look at this project if that's what the people want. But I think it's the time now for you guys to think what you want to do, and do you want to be in control and have a say in a very, very substantial asset that's heading our way. That's where I sit on all of this. I fully see and I understand the pain and the hardship that this club's been through since 2002, and we're still paying for the sins of the past. There's no doubt about that. Someone said you haven't got a ground. Well, this isn't really our ground anymore. You know, if you look at a successful non-league club these days, it has to have its own facility. It has to have a method and an ability to generate funds away from the football playing side of things, which actually drains funds out of the club. This is an opportunity to say, it's something of a leap of faith at the moment, but what is really important for you all to understand at the moment is that we haven't gone and done a Margate or something like that, where we're asking people to get involved in something where the wage bill is £12,500 a week or something like that. We've got a team at the moment and a club at the moment that is controlled and controlled tightly. The money that we're going to get from Wimbledon, and I bring in here, there is a legal document, and if they're in breach of that legal document, then, you know, there is obvious ramifications as the fact that they've defaulted on the agreement. So that is set in stone. There is no doubt about that. But my point is that what we're looking for now is people to start to try and to think, let's forget about some of the hardship of the past and let's try and move this thing forward in a positive and an energetic way. The reality is that for too long now we've shuffled around this ever-growing stadium. We've got a position on the field where we've had, you know, the budget is as tight as a tick, yet through the last 11 years we continue to remain competitive, and we continue, with the exception of directors' loans, to pay the wages and all the other bills. The only thing that is outstanding are directors' loans, which we're getting rid of, which will go in the case of a new start of a community-owned club. So what I'm saying to you is, the way I read this, and this is new to me tonight, is that this is an opportunity. If it's not the right time for that opportunity, if you don't feel confident enough or enthusiastic enough to take that, then fine. We understand. I understand that. But you know, there is a substantial asset. There is some of that asset going to pay both the pitch rental of wherever we go, and also on top of that, it's going to pay something, the proportion of the budget shortfall. Okay, so really, it is your decision. Totally accept that. But please understand that we feel that at this time, it is certainly worth you considering very deeply whether you want to be an active part of a new structure or not. Okay? Thank you.
Coming to...
We're grateful to you, Mark, for the money you've put in recent years.
Coming to Tamor and then to Jamie. Tamor.
I, for one, don't think you should be paying for it the rest of the time. But that doesn't mean to say that it wouldn't still be done.
No, I'll be right.
Thank you, Lawrence.
I think this has been proposed for the right reasons, so I don't doubt the reasons behind it. And I'm surprised that 5149 has not been more energetically and specifically proposed, because it would combine stability and continuity and some certainty with a mechanism for ownership and involvement and participation by fans, including fans who want to and would be willing to pay £50 a year, for example, for membership, in order to generate some funds at a time when the club will obviously have reduced revenue while ground sharing, because gates, I suppose, would be predicted to come down to some degree. So just to link back to what Alistair was asking, it is confusing. It's confusing to me, and I think to a lot of people in this room, how we would get to 5149. So if I vote yes, I agree with the principle of fan ownership. I think the board are right about proposing it now, potentially. Okay, I look at that timeline. Is it between 2 and 3 that there's a vote of all those who have become members of the community-owned club, and they decide how it's constituted, and the directors follow that lead and are committed to following it and reducing their shareholding so that the 3 of them have 49% for an interim period at least? Or is it sometime later in the process, sometime after 6, so there's an interim period where we're 100% owned, but we all understand that there's a route map back down to 5149? Now, we've seen the other examples of fan-owned clubs, and you've said, you know, the vast majority it's 100%. I think the qualms that a lot of people have is that 100% owned right now, without the Chessington ground and wherever it will be, would be too far and an uncertainty too far. But that there are compromise positions in between, and if we have conversations about that and can see a route map to that, I can see people voting for it. So I'd ask the panel if they could just address that specific point. And the second question I have is about viability. How do we evaluate viability? I mean, one way would be if we were clear before we vote on the shortfall in income that will follow. I.e., if we're fan-owned and we're not getting directors' loans every year, how much is that a year on average? Because then we would know as fans, okay, well, if we have 150 members who pay 50 quid a year to be members, that will generate X amount of money. How short are we? And if we're going to be structurally short for 2-3 years, how big is that going to be, and are we going to be a random Prem card or a step below? But having some idea of the finances at that level is not to criticise the board over the directors' loans. We're grateful for them. We were singing about them at Hendon the other night, you might have heard. It's so that we understand what's the shortfall. What would we need to raise? What would we need to put in? What would we need to marshal just to be where we're at now before we even start about taking a step further forward? So I can see the positives in this, I can see why it's being done, but I'd love to be clearer on both the structure, the specific structure that's best for this club. Because by the way, supporters direct are not saying, we've looked at Kingstonian situation and we think this is right for you right now. They're just saying, this is in general a good idea, it can work and will facilitate a vote. So what's the structure and a route map to a more reliable structure we can vote for? And secondly, help us evaluate the viability. Help us decide whether we can put ourselves in your shoes. Because you've done... I think one positive thing about having this vote now is we're having a conversation about how you run a football club, how you do it best and how we do it in the future. And I think it's a conversation everyone at K's needed to have at some point. And this vote, whatever happens, even if it's a no vote, has made all of us think again about how much you do for us, you do, and how much we would need to do if we stepped up. And some of us are concerned about that, but at least we're having that conversation.
Can I also point out to our friend here that at the moment, the directors are not paying for the floodlights or the ground.
Just here from the top table. It's a good question raised.
Well, to answer Tamor's points, in order, firstly, we've not considered the possibility of, if you like, split ownership for any period, either from the vote through to when the club would become a community-owned club, or for an interim period. So that's something we could certainly discuss if that's what people wanted. To answer Alistair's point, which I didn't get round to answering, or we feel we ought to answer, there are no objections to having a second referendum with the people within this room, or the 252 people. If people decide that they want to go down the community-owned club route, then very happy for people to decide, if that's the easiest way of doing it, what the future's going to be and what the community-owned club structure is going to look like. Then that's, very happy to do that. And in the third point about directors' loans and budget, etc., without revealing more than I can do at the moment, and obviously I'm only one of 3 people here, what I can say to you is that the money that we will get as a donation towards the budget will cover the money that the directors would normally put into the club for those 3 years. So the club you would not be starting from a more negative position than if we carry on as we currently are.
So just quickly on this, you said for a 3-year period there's an agreement that the Wimbledon money, a part of it, can go both to paying a rent on a new ground and in some level of subsidy to the everyday budget.
Yes.
And then beyond 3 years, what's it subject to?
That's as far as we've got in terms of the negotiation. The intention would be in 3 years' time we'll be in a clear position on where we will be in terms of raising money and not needing that, and so on and so forth.
As someone who's on the panel here, I'd add that it's my understanding, as the steering group works, that we couldn't have on the referendum no yes if this, yes if this, yes if this. So it was a bit like Brexit. It is a yes, no, and then if it was decided that we were to go to community-based club, then we would decide what that would be. So a referendum is one way of doing that, but there would be others. If it was overwhelmingly one option, then we wouldn't need one. But I think the idea would be that we would come back and evaluate what the correct model would be. Over to Jamie for a question, please.
Well, I'll just echo quite a few of the gentlemen over there and Lawrence as well. Jeff York said about the supporters we got at this club. I do not believe we've got enough supporters here to be a community-run club. And I'm all for a community club, don't get me wrong. But let's get a new ground first. Let's get like the rental and everything like that done. And everything like that. But a question more for Mark and John. No, I don't need the exact figure, but how much does it cost to keep this club in this league, the same league we are, per year? Because you've got 252 supporters here that have voted. Then 252 supporters will not be putting their hand in their pocket and saying, oh, here's some money, here's some money, here's some money. How much will it cost the members of this club to absolutely sustain where we are for the whole year, for one season?
Could answer that.
It kind of depends how we get on in the FA Cup.
Yeah, but what about the FA Cup one? Because that's a bonus. We take that as a bonus. Yeah, I don't want to fall like the exact figure, but roughly how much? Then you've got to put ground rental on that as well, because we'll be ground sharing next year.
The shortfall over it's the issue. You have to cut your cloth accordingly.
Yeah, I get that. But now what I'm saying is, how much is the wage budget this year, roughly?
All right. For the last X number of years, the directors have been putting in the region of £20,000, £20,000 to £30,000, based on a shortfall of where we were at the end of each season. Now, some seasons that was a bit more than other seasons, depending on cup runs, also depending on the number of directors that were involved. If you remember under Alan Dowson, Alan managed to find another couple of directors on top. Consequently, the budget was higher than it is currently when there's only the 3 of us.
That's what I'm saying. So you're looking at about 120 grand a year between 252 that voted. So you're looking at, what, 200 supporters. That's how much your annual bill will cost. With like you've got gate receipts on top, I get that. But I do believe this vote is 5 years too early. This vote's got to be put in when we've got a new ground. Because you've got volunteers here. We struggle to get stewards on match days. You struggle to get people to do things on match days. You've got Yorgos running his arse off, bringing in money and everything like that with marketing, which people don't see. You know, Mark puts his hand in his pocket, John, Malcolm, they all put their hand in their own pocket to get money into this club, to actually pay players' wages. And I can say, since Cosler's gone, Jimmy, when he was chairman, Mark and everything like that, the players have always got paid on time. I don't think they deserve it sometimes, but they've always got paid on time. And who will finance this money? Jeff said as well, the average age of people are between, what was it, Jeff, sorry, 18 and 35?
No, the quote I had was for a young to middle-aged group. We saw it.
Right, a young to middle-aged group.
Hold on.
Wimbledon have ripped the heart out of that. They might be good landlords, they might put a ground on, they might do this, they might do that. But they've ripped the heart out of our support.
What are we doing to try and...
We've got kids for free. We've got kids for free coming in. Wimbledon around every single school in this area, bringing in kids. Turning around and saying, we're coaching. What are they doing? They're coming at Wimbledon games. You know, you've got to stand there and think about that. We've got a youth team. That's not even part of this Poxy club. They're not even coming down. You've got an under-18 side. How many under-18s players do you see, apart from if they're enrolled in the first team, sitting there watching the supporters? Sitting in the stand? How many parents of the under-14s do you see down here? You don't see anyone. I'm all for, don't get me wrong, I'm all for community-based club, but I don't think there's enough of us. If there was like, you know, you get a new ground and then all of a sudden, I came down in the first game against Slough Town at home in '89. There was 800 and something odd supporters. That was the time then. It's been mismanaged up till Cosler. And that's no disrespect, like I say, Jim took it off of him. And then Mark took it on. They've taken it forward. And they've done a good job, considering the debts that the club was left in. You cannot... This club has been badly managed for years. Badly managed. You know, and if we get a new crowd, we get a new club, all of a sudden we can start working off of that. You can then have your vote in 5 years' time and say, right, we've got 500, 600 people following us. And that's the way, I believe that's the way it's got to go. If it goes community club, I'll still be at this club, don't get me wrong. But that's the way, that's what you've got to think about. Okay?
There's just a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. Thanks for your comments, Jamie, much appreciated. Jeff, who was the club that you spoke to? If you care to say, who was the person at whatever club you spoke to? What club was it? So you.
It don't matter. Yorgos, it don't matter.
I mean, maybe I could just give some general questions. So you're absolutely right. The 252 people dipping into their pocket to make up the shortfall is not what this is actually about. I can see why that is how it looks. I think all the things that were said are exactly what you hope you can switch around here. So some of these clubs have more members than they got people turn up to matches because they just want a club and they want it to be community owned and it matters, you know, even if they can't get to the game. So, you know, I came down to the Enfield game the other day and then I saw I was running around and everyone running around and I was thinking, you know, we need more people to be getting involved. But, you know, so can we continue for another 5-6 years? I mean, I'm not the one running around, but if I was running around like that, I don't know if I'd be able to continue for another 5. So where are we going to find all these extra young people? How are we going to reach out? And it's not an easy answer. How do you get, you know, can we get more sponsorship because you're community owned? In theory you can, because we know other clubs have managed to do it. You know, Banbury United, they've managed to get about 75 grand of commercial income this year when they got relegated and had a shocker last year. And all right, that might be because one guy is particularly good, but also he sold the club as community owned. So all the employers in Banbury, he's basically said, we're community owned, do you not care about this football club? So it's not a magic wand, but it gives you some options. And I guess it's what if you don't? That's almost the other question, isn't it? You know, it's the bit of an elephant in the room. Are people going to continue to show the support and passion that you guys are, and the amount of money that's going in and all the volunteering hours?
Sorry, just a quick question on that. Sorry, just Banbury United, just saying that. Yeah. Right? Banbury United, you know my Football League side they got around them? Yeah. In this community here, yeah. You've got football in the community at Fulham. Yeah. They go in all the schools. Yeah. You've got a youth team that don't even bother turning up. You've got a youth team that ain't even part of us. They just use our name. And everything like that. And getting back to Northampton, what you said about that geezer on there on Northampton, just one little quick question. Yeah. Didn't they get wound up by receivership by Linda Revenue in 2015?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you, that's the end of that. Thank you.
Brian inspired a bit of a movement, but they never owned the club. He started this whole thing.
Can I just finish off? Okay, Jeff, you don't want to identify the club, that's fine. Well, I'm not, and neither's Jim. But the point I wanted to make, you mentioned that we had much passion in the last 15 years. We haven't had much success, but we've got an awful lot of passion. You can see by the people that have turned up tonight. And there's people like Colin Deadman who've done a lot for the club over a number of years. He's here because he cares about the future of the club. There's other people, John and Denise Turner and Holly at the back, and all sorts of people here tonight. We've got plenty of passion within our match day volunteers that help run a match day. I don't think they will. Well, people have turned up this evening, given up their own time during the week to turn up. They obviously care. I mean, Alistair and Tamor have made a couple of valid points, and like Mark said, you know, we've put it out there this evening. Jim and I have joined the working committee, me as a supporter, and also helping bring in sponsorship. Jim's the treasurer of the supporters club. We're not telling you what to do, we're not recommending anything. What we're basically saying is, if you don't think the right time's now, then like Mark said, actually you're quite right, we could put it to a second referendum. We just want to ask the question, are you interested in taking a route of community ownership, yes or no? And where we go from there, whether we take the 51-49 route, we're willing to discuss it. And I've approached various people in your group. I've spoken to you, Tamor, I've spoken to Jamie about it, and we're willing to sort of get your sort of view on it and sort of go from there. What we're basically sort of saying is we're happy to do whatever you would like us to do. The board are sort of saying that within reason, they're giving you a choice. But to say that we've lost passion in the last 15 years, Jeff, I think is an understatement, because you've got a lot of passion in this room, you've got a lot of people that care.
How many of the people that spoke with passion in the area have you actually spoken to and ticked off as a resource that's available to assist with the raising of funds if this club goes CVC?
Well, I've got...
Can't hear. Can't hear.
The question was how many supporters have you directly asked if they would be willing to support this?
Well, until we know the outcome of the vote, we can't say.
I suggested earlier on, I'll stick with it, that is the wrong way round. You've got to make sure that it works before you ask for a vote.
Sorry, I said Jeff. We need assets first.
Okay, we've got any more questions? There's one.
Thanks. I don't think anyone is doubting the passion of individual volunteers, but there simply aren't enough people. If only 252 people have registered to vote, that is an atrocious number. That is roughly the same as our average crowd. Our average crowd is going to sink dramatically when we go to Carshalton or wherever it is, with no end in sight to that ground share agreement. The plan to move to Chessington is a pipe dream. If it ever happens, I'd be amazed. We've got funding in place for 3 years, I think, John, you said, from AFC Wimbledon to pay for the ground share. Any new ground is going to take far longer than that. The attendance is going to sink from 252. Our average attendance will be somewhere around 100. How you possibly think we will get enough volunteers to run a club and to raise money is beyond me. I'm told we pay AFC Wimbledon £75 per match, every match this season, to fork the pitch because we can't get a volunteer to do it. How are we going to fund this club?
So, Gary, what's your alternative?
I thought you had to
Well, what's your
wait.
alternative? You've got to answer
Wait
that.
until...
My alternative would, sorry, you asked a question, Jim, I'll answer it. My alternative would be, as other people have said, to wait until we have certainty over the ground, telling us at this point in time, don't worry, we'll have a ground sorted out for you, we're not going to tell you where it's going to be. Here's a pretty picture of a drawing of a potential place in Chessington, no planning permission applied for. The leader of the council spoke to my dad actually the other day and said there is a slim to none chance of that ground ever being built in Chessington. We need certainty before we can possibly think about taking over this club. If you're all saying the ground's going to be sorted out, brilliant. Wait until there is certainty, until there's planning permission applied for and granted, then we know where we're going to be. Then you might get people coming to watch this club, but playing Carl Shorten for 5 years, the attendance is going to plummet. No one is going to fund it.
So in your own words, we're not going to get this ground, so what are we going to do?
What do you mean?
Well, you've just said that the leader of the council has told your dad that there's virtually no chance of us getting the ground in Chessington. So what are we going to do?
Why are we not trying to stay here or move to
Yes.
Why is no one talking about moving nearer the actual body of the support that we currently got?
That's not the purpose of this evening. Was to decide whether we become a community-based club or not.
Yes, but the two are intrinsically linked. You must understand the ground, which we know nothing about, is intrinsically linked to the question of the ownership of the club.
I don't think it is. You can make.
We don't have assets. We don't have a club.
Let's just have a proper conversation.
In the real world, yeah.
The question. I'm not involved. We, as a working party, were tasked with coming up with a proposal or a referendum as to whether the football club should become a community-based club or it should remain a private limited company run by directors. This is what we've done, and this is what we're here to discuss tonight. Not whether we're moving to Carshalton or Timbuktu, whether we're going to be in Chessington in 3 years or no, I'm sorry. It isn't the point. The point is whether we should take this opportunity, and if you're also keen on Kingstonian Football Club, whether you're prepared to put in the work to become a community-based club or not. That's the sole purpose of this event.
Okay, any other questions?
Go to Tim at the front.
Well, you all know me. Welsh is just going to have a little pop. First of all, what I would say is, I think personally that everybody that's here, as Gent was saying, when we're all gone and under the daisies, who are the youth people going to come up and support the football club? I can't see that happening because some people around here don't even know we exist. The other thing I would say is I think this club, if they can, should open, have a day here for businesses to come, businesses to know about this club, to get involved in this club. In the days of Jimmy Cochran, when he was young, all around Kingston upon Thames, it was all local firms and they knew the local football club. Now it's very, very cosmopolitan. If this club doesn't open it up for businesses and say, look, come and have a chat with us, see what we can offer, see what you can offer. If they don't get the clubs involved or get the businesses involved that way, then we're not going to attract any sponsors or any people at all. That's just my personal opinion. The other thing I would say is, if we are going to go to a new ground, wherever it is, let's pinpoint the firms and the buildings and the companies that are around that area very early to say, look, the club is going to be in your area, please get involved. And the final thing I was going to say is, unfortunately, if we do go to Carshalton, bye-bye Kingstonian.
Well,
Evening. A lot of this pitch, as I see it, is based around community, about being a community model. I think the ingredient that's really missing for us at the moment is community, because we are going to be nomads. We don't even know the community we're going to be working with for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So how on earth do we go about envisaging how we can involve and interact with that particular community? I know you've referenced a few examples in the past. I mean, you mentioned Lewis probably a couple of times too many for my liking, because if you look at that as a town, that is a town which really buys into the model of that kind of organisation. Whereas here, we've got all these other clubs on our doorstep. There is very transient, kind of like a body of people live here. There isn't that involvement, which leads me on to my second point about passion. We talk about people to take this on. I don't know how much information you have about our previous supporters trust here. Okay, yeah. So we had a supporters trust here, I don't know, about 10, 12, 13 years ago. And that was actually a time when there was a lot of passion, because we had an absolute enemy running the club, and there was an uprising of fans. We got a lot of numbers together. A trust was formed with the purpose of taking on the club. So it was absolutely like there was maximum passion, and that fell apart. Has there been any kind of looking back and reflecting on why couldn't we sustain it then? Because if we couldn't sustain it then, when our entire existence was on the line, why on earth would we have the passion now? When actually we've got plan B is just carry on as we are. Fine. Why would we do that now?
So question one, I think, is good. I'll stop talking about Lewis. There are some clubs here. There are some that are like a Banbury, that've got their own geographic community, but there's a fissure. There's a fissure in there who actually, if they had half of what you had tonight to start with, they would have been flying. They haven't been playing in their home community since they reformed in, best part of 10 years ago. They've been playing down in Dulwich. They get gates of under 100.
But presuming they knew what that community was, I don't even know where we're going to be next season.
Yeah,
So
when they reformed the club, they didn't really know where they were playing, to be fair. They ended up managing to ground share at Dulwich, but they were bringing kids down from the Fisher area, from the Fisher Community Centre, to try and retain some sort of connection with the club. And there were some people that put an unbelievable amount of effort in. I won't deny it.
We can't do that with Fulham. And just that Fulham training ground down the road. Now FC Wimbledon sitting here. Yeah. We cannot go out to the local schools and get them kids.
Yeah. But just to finish on this question.
Sorry.
I mean,
sorry to interrupt.
But no, you're right. It's same with Enfield Town. They played around a bit. Arguably similar, maybe supporter size base, but still.
Just come back to you. So, I think the big issue here is AFC Wimbledon aren't actually vacating this town yet.
Yeah.
So we have an issue where you keep going with all these examples, all these other clubs. Yeah. I mean, Fisher, Dulwich, they're not the kind of distances and the kind of issues that we'd have if, say, we ended up at, say, Carl Shorten. But we fundamentally have a football league side who are a very slick organisation. I'm sure supporters direct know AFC Wimbledon quite well. They're a very slick organisation, which have, willingly or otherwise, they have been suffocating us, and they are not vacating our town. We are the ones vacating our town. Yeah. So what community is that? What's left for us?
Difficult question to answer. I'm not going to defend it. All I'm going to say is you've got to find a way that Kingston wants its own club, and I know that's really difficult because you don't know where you're going to be playing, but you've got a core support of passionate people that obviously care about the club. That's part one. How you can then bring others into it, you've got to find a way to do that, and I think the only way to do that is to go for the local, basis of having a club that is historically linked to your town. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm just being honest about the different examples that exist. Really, London is different than all the other places because there's so many clubs that are competing for different supporters, and I'm not sure the community is quite there as it is in some of these other places. But you've got something that is probably stronger than some of these other clubs in terms of history and a core support base. And I say that with Fisher, they've got some people.
But we tried once and we failed.
I think I wasn't around back then. It was about 10 years ago when the trust was around, wasn't it? They never owned the club. The proposition now is about owning a football club, which is a stronger proposition.
We can run an organisation which wasn't responsible for the football club. Now we're actually trying to run a football club. So there's a lot more malign here if we don't make it work.
All I can say is from experience, the idea of running and owning your club is a lot more exciting and stronger, and should galvanise more support and interest than just running a supporters organisation.
252 is far fewer than what we had last time. The trust membership was significantly higher than that. Membership, not even voting.
It won't work with 250. I'll be honest, the only way it'll work is if you find a way to get more members. More, you need more people who just buy into the idea that Kingston has a club and they own it.
Can I just come, James? Can I just come in? One of the things that surprised me last year when we were selling raffle tickets for the Christmas draw up at Matland's home base was the number of people who knew about Kingstonian and knew about the situation with AFC Wimbledon. So there is a community out there. It's just a question of us being able to. But it will still bear the name Kingstonian, and as long as we sell the message, in my view, that our aim is to come back to the borough, then hopefully we can overcome that. But we've got to be positive. We've got to want to do this. We've got to want the club to survive, because the vibes I get are people are just going to sit here, hope the directors can continue. We're already talking about how many people we're going to lose when we ground share, and if that goes on for 5 or 6 years, it's going to be down to under 100. We've just got to try and change our views. That's why I agreed to be on this working party, because I want Kingstonian Football Club to survive and prosper. And it might be uncomfortable, but I will do all I can to help and make sure it does survive.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, it's just a question for the working party. The word that's often been used is community. Well, as part of a community, a local authority is part of a community, and I'd like to know where exactly the local authority are when these things are happening, because we want to try and retain the club in Kingston or in the borough of Kingston. And I can remember when we had our good cup run, walking down to Brentford's ground and seeing a limousine go whizzing by with the number plate RBK1 on it. They were there then when they were getting their freeloading tickets and all the publicity. Now, if this club was to turn itself around and get back into the path that it was on before, they'll be back again. But what we do need the local authority to get involved now. And I don't know whereabouts they are in relation to this presentation that's going on tonight.
But they want to know why we injected ourselves in this ground when we had security there in 2023.
Yes, hang on. Just quickly, let's just see if there's an answer. Do we want to?
I'll come in on a bit. I'm a councillor in Kingston, admittedly in the opposition, so I'm not privy to some of the info. But I'd say that, I don't think this is talking out of turn, I'd say that the council as is, Kingstonian isn't in their interest, really. I mean, Mark here might have had a few conversations with people higher up the chain that I'm not privy to. But I'd say that the problem is that the council doesn't own any land. So for the council to it does own land, but not enough land to build a football pitch on. So for the council to provide a new place in Kingston, that's not going to happen realistically. Chessington is an idea. There's been conversations, I don't know the ins and outs, but I'd say that if we're hoping for the council to come and look after, realistically, the borough's, it's not the borough's only football club. I don't know why they would choose us.
They didn't look after us when we was in the conference, so why are they going to look after us now?
I don't think I think that's wishing too much, and I wish it was the case. And I'm obviously a fan And the mayor is quite a big fan, and you'll see him down here quite a lot. But I don't think there's anything that the administration as is can offer in. I think we're on our own, realistically.
It probably did.
We are having regular meetings with the leader of the council. The mayor is more of a figurehead, but very, very supportive to us. And there is a willingness from the leader of the council and from the council themselves to do as much as they can to help us. Now, talk is easy, isn't it? It's the doing that's the hard thing. And we have a situation at Chessington, and I'm not privy to Gary's dad's conversations with people. I think if he had the conversation about Chessington, that's not right. Chessington isn't. Sorry, not Chessington. Carl Shorten Athletic is not on any list.